I'm Chris Williams from Cyclone Fanatic and a proud Iowa State graduate from the class of 2007. No one shows up like Iowa State fans. And Cyclones support Cyclones on and off the field. Your gift can provide scholarships to students, fund groundbreaking research. We could even drum up opportunities for the marching band. Visit MoveWhatMatters.com to learn how you can make an impact today.
Cyclone Nation, what better way to kick off the 2025 college football season than cheering on your Cyclones in the Aer Lingus College Football Classic in Dublin, Ireland? Whether it's a quick trip to Dublin for the game, a multi-city adventure throughout the Irish countryside, or premium game day hospitality, there is a package for you. Visit cyclones2ireland.com for information on official travel and hospitality packages. That's Cyclones, the number 2, Ireland.com.
Welcome into Kickin' It. This is a extremely special. It's a double special. Triple special? Triple special.
Double just for now.
Okay, it's double special Kickin' It.
Each guest is special.
Each guest is special, but then the combination is another level of special. It's 1 plus 1.
Then
double
you add
special.
us into a quadruple special.
Then we take away from it.
Then
that brings it back down to like just normal. Anyway, I'm Jeff Woody. This is Grant Mahoney. Aiden Wyatt is producing. We are brought to you by Kelderman Manufacturing, Kelderman.com. You want to buy anything special, fun, custom? You got fun hot rod, car, tractor, front yard, anything you feel like you want custom manufactured or laser cut. They do a lot of laser cutting. Big Iowa State fans, support Kelderman Manufacturing, Kelderman.com. Also, thank you to the Iowa Pork Producers Association. We couldn't do what we do without sponsors. It's always fun to talk about different pork recipes that we are eating or have eaten. Between the first interview that we did, and the second interview, we would have made both pulled pork and would have made like a solid slew of bacon for a brunch over the weekend. So thank you to the Iowa Pork Producers Association of doing that. And I mentioned there were 2 interviews that we're doing. So as you can probably guess in the title of the show, we've got 2 worldwide leader guests.
I shot my shot, man. They both responded pretty quick. And I was like, am I being bamboozled right now?
Yeah. are we really getting confirmed? So Rich Hollenberg, who is fantastic, phenomenal play-by-play guy for ESPN's basketball coverage. He does a lot of the Big 12, does do other conferences as well, but we know him most from the Big 12 games, whether that's him and Fran.
He said he's been in the Big 12 about 10 years too.
Yeah, I think it was 17 years calling basketball, but 10 years with the Big 12. But he is terrific. We're gonna start with Rich Hollenberg, and then we're gonna move on to a guy with a great hairline, great looking dome. Seth Greenberg is going to join us in the second half of the show. So I'm just super pumped for this one. And I mean, if you're wondering how we got these guests, it really was Grant just...
I fired off, 8 tweets or so to just, I'll see if these guys, ESPN, Fox, wherever they're at, if they'll come on the show. And those 2 plus another football guy got to me, and we're still looking to connect with him, but probably will closer to football season. But yeah, both those guys gave me a follow back, and Seth was like, "Yeah, shoot me an email." I was like, "This was too easy.
It's too straightforward."
Am I being?" And then his email wasn't like at ESPN. It was a little unique. I was like, Then he gave me his number. We called him and can confirm.
Yeah, and there will be a little bit difference, and we'll get to that kind of between the interviews. But for right now, let's get to it. First interview, Rich Hollenberg. And now we welcome in a very special guest. We have Rich Hollenberg, who is, I feel like you've been to Ames a fair number of times. And I feel like you're always well received, but you're like a little bit always sidekicked to Fran Fraschilla, because Fran could walk into feels like he can walk into any restaurant and just say, "Hey, give me whatever," and they're just going to give it to him for free. But I wanted to start with a compliment, and forgive me at least a little bit of a long-winded way. So I do enough broadcasting stuff for football, and in football, you're way up in the stands, and you're 80 yards away from the action. In basketball, you guys are feet from the court, and for those that aren't super sure, like you're right behind it's sideline, table, you guys. And one thing that you do really well, and whether you're with Fran or not, is in crazy moments, you let the moments breathe really well. And so the moments feel as big as the moment I think should feel. And I think I just wanted to get like, you don't have to pander because it's Hilton, but is there any moment that you can think of that is just an insane moment that you're 4 feet away from, that you just kind of on the top of off the top of your head comes to mind that you remember being like, this is insane that you're this close to it?
Yeah, well, first off, let's rewind just a moment, and thank you guys for having me on this. I feel like I've, over the years, fallen in love with Ames and Iowa State and that basketball team. So it's certainly a pleasure to chat about Iowa State and Ames and anything in between that. But to answer your question, Jeff, I honestly think that I wouldn't be doing my job appropriately if I didn't treat every game within a moment within every game like you just described. Hilton, I'll be honest, it's easier to do that because of the crowd and the ambiance and the electricity and the energy of the Cyclones fans that bring it virtually every single time. I know it's been every time I've called the game there. But games that I covered when I was cutting my teeth and climbing the proverbial ladder at ESPN, I treated every single game like it was Hilton Coliseum and Kansas was in the building, or something to that effect. Because whoever's watching that game, more likely than not, they're watching it because they're invested for some reason. Sure, you're going to have casual fans and they'll tune in and turn away to another channel and another game or something else that they have going on in their lives. But the people who are watching and really paying attention to the game, they're fans of one of those two teams. So it's a big game for them every single time. And that's something that I was taught 17 years ago when I started calling college basketball games at ESPN. Let it breathe. Less is more. Laying out. All those 3 L's. That is one of, if not the most important thing that I tell aspiring play-by-play announcers that you have to work into your repertoire. We don't get paid by the word. I don't make more money if I talk more. As a matter of fact, I think I do my job better if I talk less, because my ultimate goal as an announcer is, as you mentioned, I have, very fortunately, the best seat in the house every game that I'm calling. I want the audience to have that kind of access. I want them to feel what I feel. And selfishly, to be honest with you, part of what I love about laying out, like you talked about, is I get to be a fan for a few beats, for a few moments. And I get to kind of look around Hilton and see it shaking from the rafters on down and check out the end zones and see Cyclone Alley going bonkers and all of that stuff. I get to absorb that and then cap the moment after 3 or 5 or maybe 10 seconds, depending on how big the moment is.
So now you mentioned that in that moment you're able to be a fan. Now you went to Syracuse, and so one thing I wanted to ask you is, maybe a dumb question, are you able to call Syracuse games? 1 and 2, how are we able to not be like, if we went to Iowa State, if I ever called, like if I was in your shoes, never called a game in Iowa, I would like cheer for whoever Iowa was playing. So like, how do you then not, like if you're calling a game, where someone is playing Duke and say you hated Duke and how are you able to go about calling a game where that bias doesn't creep in?
Yeah, well, good question, Grant. First of all, there are no dumb questions. That's another thing that I preach to people who choose me as a mentor. The dumbest questions get the smartest answers, is what I always say. You want to ask those open-ended questions. So the answer is yes, I do get to call Syracuse games. I love calling Syracuse games. But at the same time, I understand that I have to be, for lack of a better word, professional in the game that I'm calling. The last thing I would want is for someone to rise up on social media and get those Twitter muscles or whatever you want to call them and be like, I knew that dude was rooting for Syracuse because X, Y, and Z. Now, honestly, that pretty much happens to us anytime and all the time anyway. Just the other day, I was talking about Houston basketball and how I really can't find anything bad to say about that basketball team. They're one of the best.
They're so good. They're so good.
The last couple of games, they've beaten an Iowa State team that was down their 2 top scorers, and then they did the same thing to Texas Tech, down their 2 top scorers. Maybe not their 2 top scorers, but 2 of their best players. So I said, I'm not going to downgrade Houston for winning those games, but those games were close. So in turn, let's celebrate the Cyclones and the Red Raiders as being just that good, that they could still, without 2 of their best players, compete with the likes of Houston. And man, did I get raked over the coals. Houston Cougars fans, I was like, I thought you guys loved me. I thought you were on my side. So the one thing you learn very early on in this business is 50% of the people are going to love you. The other 50% are going to think you suck for whatever reason. That's why, fan is born out of the larger word fanatic. And sometimes when you're a fanatic, you sometimes fall a little bit short in terms of being rational in your opinions. So the long answer to your short question is I love calling Syracuse games, but I would never call a Syracuse game more than right down the middle, just like I do every game.
So thank you for coming on Cyclone Fanatic. So you mentioned the Big 12, and let's bring it into the Big 12 now. So this year, this is the first year that I can remember, like, the general national consensus is that the Big 12 isn't the best conference. It's one of the best conferences. Now, I don't necessarily need you to say, like, oh, the Big 12 is the best, but how have you seen, because you said for 17 years, you've been at ESPN. How many of those years have you been calling Big 12 games?
This is my 10th year in total calling Big 12 games.
Okay. And it feels like that's about the time when the Big 12 sort of ascent to being the quote SEC or the Big 10 of basketball. Yeah, and how have you seen this year? Yeah, air quotes. How have you seen this year kind of compare to other years? And is it just the narrative swinging, or do you feel like there is more balance across the conferences in college basketball, kind of just more broadly than just this? Yeah, the Big 12 is really good this year. Well, so is the SEC, and so is XYZ other conferences.
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors, to be honest with you, and I'm not a Big 12 apologist. I am a Big 12 fan. I think they are just as good as any conference in basketball this year. I just think that the ceiling and the floor might be a little bit wider for the SEC than it is this year for the Big 12. We were talking about the Big 12 last year like everyone's talking about the SEC this year. Let's not forget that. And oh, by the way, all the Big 12 did is add Arizona to the mix this year, and BYU last year, and Houston last year. So the rich have gotten richer. But I do think that NIL is certainly leveling the playing field across the landscape of college basketball. And I do think that the SEC is filthy rich when it comes to NIL money, and other conferences are starting to catch on and catch up. But I also think that this year in particular, if you want to look at it through that one lens, Kansas isn't Kansas this year. And I think Bill Self would be the first one to tell you that. And if Kansas was Kansas, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I would be a Big 12 apologist. I would take on any SEC lover and say, I'll see your Auburn and your Alabama and your Florida, and I'll raise you a Kansas and a Houston and an Iowa State. And put those 6 teams in a room and let them fight it out. I'll take my odds with the Big 12 each and every time. I don't know if I would say that this year, because I think Auburn is just that good. Fran and I called that Auburn-Houston game at the beginning of the year, and it felt even way back in November like a Final Four matchup. And Auburn has actually gotten better. They've continued to win without arguably the player of the year in Janai Broome. So you look at that and you say, okay, take the best player off of all these other contenders and how good are they? Well, you've seen Iowa State struggle. Not their best players, but the last couple of games, no Keyshawn Gilbert, Curtis Jones didn't play in the Houston game, and now all of a sudden they've lost 2 games. One to Houston, which nobody has to make any excuses for, but losing to Oklahoma State, if you are a championship team, is unforgivable, in my opinion. And TJ Altenberger in his post-game press conference essentially said that. Like, when TJ admits that a team beat them up and out-physicaled them, you know he's pissed. And he has every right to be, even without Keyshawn Gilbert. For a stretch, they were without Milan, and they suffered. So it all comes down to who is hot and who is healthy come mid-March. And if any one of those top-tier teams in the Big 12 is hot and healthy, I think they have just as good a chance to run the table as any of these SEC teams that we're talking about. But the ceiling and the floor in the SEC is better this year than it is in the Big 12.
And I want to ask you about that too. So I'm gonna use some stats that are very biased towards Iowa State. So they're 18-1 when they have had a full healthy team. When Milan's been in there, Keyshawn's been in there, and Curtis has been in there. The one loss came to Auburn, last second tip-in, and Iowa State was up, double digits for a lot of that game. But the Oklahoma State loss, it shouldn't matter if Keyshawn's out. Iowa State should have won that game, and it's one of the worst losses in the TJ Altenberger era. Maybe aside from that game, they scored like 30 points in a game.
That was rough to watch. Anyway.
But I want to ask you, looking at the Iowa State team, when they are fully healthy, what do you think is their Achilles heel, or what kind of team would they need to avoid to get upset? Because I'm biased when I say this. I think when they are fully healthy, they can beat anybody in the country. I think they are one of the best teams in the country. They have a very real chance. I've said from the beginning of the year, the Final Four is the four. The Final Four is the floor. Kind of tongue in cheek. But I truly believe when they are fully healthy, they can beat anybody. So I guess my question, when they are fully healthy, what kind of teams do they need to avoid, or what kind of Achilles heel do they need to avoid for an upset in March?
Well, I mean, I think what you saw in that Oklahoma State game, 18 turnovers, Cowboys turned that into 24 points. That's not an Iowa State team. That is the exception, not the rule. So I think a team that matches your physicality would be a team that could potentially give Iowa State trouble. If everything is even and everyone is healthy across the board, which we all know is not and will not be the case, I've always compared very favorably Iowa State to Houston. The difference this year is that Houston has not one, but 2 lights out 3-point shooters. Iowa State knows who they are. They're not a great 3-point shooting team, but you're going to need at some point the threat of that, at least, if you want to say, we don't have any weaknesses. Bring on anybody who we need to face and we'll beat them. Because if Joshua Jefferson isn't having the best night, if Deshaun Jackson isn't setting elite screens, it doesn't matter. We have him and him and him who will knock down threes, and no doubt in our mind that's going to happen. Houston has that. They have it in Emmanuel Sharp. They have it certainly in LJ Cryer. And all of a sudden, they seem to have it in people like Terrence Arsenault and even Milos Uzan. So I think offensively, Houston has raised the level of their game a little bit. That would be one advantage I would give any team over Iowa State. But like I said, Iowa State knows who they are. They don't rely on the 3-point shot to win. The problem with that is the really good teams, the elite teams, Auburn, Duke, you can make the list is getting shorter now, fellas, of who I think are really capable of winning a national championship. So let's cap it at that. Auburn, Duke, Florida just got thumped last night in Athens at Georgia. I don't put them in that same category. Same as Alabama. I don't put them in that same category. They're close, but not. So how can Duke, how can Auburn take down Iowa State? They have high-level 3-point shooting. they also can complement that with high-level inside play. And they both can play defense. That's what everyone's been saying about John Shire's club this year. Man, we knew they'd be talented offensively, but they've really impressed me with their commitment to defense. It's the opposite for the Clones. The Cyclones, for the 3 years of TJ's era, have been, we have to win on defense because we are deficient offensively. And we have to find a niche so that we can compete. And all the power to them, they have. They made the Sweet 16 2 of his first 3 years. This year's different, though, because they went out and they got Joshua Jefferson and they got Keyshawn Gilbert, or rather got Deshaun Jackson. So they are much better offensively, and yet they don't necessarily, outside of obviously Curtis Jones, when he is on, can be as good as anybody offensively. I don't think they have quite the three-point shooting that some of the other top tier teams do. So if a team is going to match them with toughness and physicality and get in their jerseys defensively and force Iowa State to do something that they're not comfortable doing offensively, then they could run into trouble. But I mean, those are high-level problems, fellas. I mean, I think they are Final Four good, despite the loss to Oklahoma State. Every team is going to lay an egg. Every team shy of maybe a Houston and maybe an Auburn so far is going to lay an egg. And they laid the egg. Let's hope that that's the only one that they lay this year.
Yeah, I've thought that too. And it's frustrating because, Iowa State, Houston, we saw the brand of basketball that TJ has implemented, the hard defense work. Okay, we haven't seen this at all this year. They're capable of doing it. And then they come out and do this versus Oklahoma State. It's like, what the hell was that?
Well, and you wonder, I think you guys probably get a feel for it because I guess, do you just get to talk to each coach or do you get availability with players prior to games or is it more or less just...
We can talk to anybody we want.
Okay. Because I imagine the question that I was going to ask is sort of piggybacked off this. You guys you get to see shoot around, you get to talk to players, you get to talk to coaches. You guys probably have a feeling for how the team is feeling, fatigue. Like you look at Iowa State, they go to play Houston, and that is an all hands on deck. They got Cade Kelderman, who played what?
He played great though.
He played great for his role. He
was up in the shorts, man.
But they're playing Cade Kelderman, and that's an all hands on deck. And that takes so much emotional effort. And then in 48 hours, you got to go to Stillwater and play in front of 43 people and try and regenerate energy off of that. Is there a time, and I guess this is sort of a little microcosm and then kind of a bigger picture. You're mentioning the Dukes, the Houstons, the Auburns. When you're watching a team in the middle of the season, at what point do you feel like you have this team can go the distance type feeling? Because again, you get to feel the players, you get to talk to the coaches. To caveat this question again or contextualize, you look at Kansas. Kansas is, when they're together, unreal. Can kick the shit out of anybody.
On the road, they suck.
When they're not, they're going to lose a game by 50. And you guys probably have a better access to what that feels like and integrity. So at what point through the season do you feel like you get like, this is who this team is and this is what they can do in March?
It's a really good question because that answer has changed. It used to be by February, and this isn't me coming up with this. I'll be completely honest with y'all. A lot of what I would say in answering these questions comes from the people who I trust in the basketball world the most. Fran being one of them, my other analysts being others, but the coaches inform my opinions and my answers to these questions. And to a man, every coach would tell you, come February, the goal is to know who your team is, quote unquote. And what is our ceiling? That's changed, guys, because of the transfer portal. I think coaching has become so much more difficult and so much more uncertain because everybody wants what Kelvin Sampson has. Everybody wants what TJ Altoberger has, which is a bulletproof culture. But if you're bringing in 5, 6, 7, 8 new dudes every year, you can imagine, it doesn't take a genius to imagine how much more difficult it is to indoctrinate those new players into that culture. So by way of example, and forgive me if this is common knowledge, but this is something that I learned this year covering the Iowa State Cyclones and having the relationship that I have with TJ. He called his 3 top players from last year into a room. That would be Taman, that would be Keyshawn, and that would be Curtis. And he said, look, we don't have the NIL money to go out and spend freely and get whoever we want. But we know as a staff who we need to take that next step. And this is a Sweet 16 team from last year. So we know who we need to get better. And if you guys are willing to buy in, meaning take a little less money, we'll have the money to go get those dudes. And collectively, all 3 of them were like, go for it, coach. We're with you.
I didn't know that.
What other program has that?
Yeah.
Have those type of people with that type of high-level character, have a coach who's going to be that honest with them, and have a program that everyone wants to be all in all the time. Iowa State is on a very short list of that. The only reason I give you that example is to illustrate the fact that one thing that TJ does as well as anybody, which is why more than any other reason, his name is going to be mentioned, justified or not, with Indiana's head coaching opening, all the top job openings. The first names you hear are TJ Altenberger and Grant McCaslin, because they are cut from the same cloth. They say, if you buy in, if you believe, and you let me show you the way, we will do what we're setting out to do. And both of them are doing that right now. But getting back to the Iowa State example, TJ knows more about his team now than most teams do, because most teams are either dealing with blue chip freshmen or transfers from the portal, and they're still trying to figure out, has everybody bought in? Is everybody all in? Which of these dudes is already hearing from their agent, oh, next, you're not getting enough playing time, so don't worry about this year. Next year, I know we could get you someplace where we're going to get you 7 figures instead of 6. That happens all the flipping time now. And it's infuriating to someone like me, because you get one shot when you're in college, one shot to create a legacy for yourself. That's not going to happen jumping from school to school to school. No one's going to remember you. If you stay 2 or 3 years, that's when they remember you. And that's what Curtis Jones sees, and that's what Milan sees, and that's what Keyshawn sees, and that's hopefully what the other players will see as well. So TJ's at an advantage in that sense. Houston is as well. They brought back 4 of their 5 starters. They had 1 freaking transfer this year. What other school can say that? 1 dude. And they targeted him, and he targeted them, Milos Uzan. And that's it. Now, granted, he had to replace Jamal Shed, who I thought could have been player of the year nationally last year.
Yeah, same.
So that was big shoes to fill. But Milos has done a really good job of doing that. Why? Because he bought in, but all it took was Kelvin to turn 1 dude into that culture, indoctrinate into that culture. Same thing with TJ. Just give me Joshua, give me Deshaun. If those guys, if I could drag them in as fast as possible, we're good. And they are. They've been a top 10 team all year.
Well, hopefully they might slip out of this next week. If we beat Arizona, though, who knows? You mentioned obviously Houston. Uzan he's freaking hot recently. I think he's playing some of the best ball of anybody in the country right now. Also, I think I heard, you might know this too, Rich. You might know this better than I heard that Houston has only had 1 guy transfer out of their program in 10 years. I don't know if you know that's true or not.
I can't say that's true, and especially because I only covered them a couple of times when they were in the American Conference. But I know most of their dudes are 3- and 4-year dudes.
Yeah.
And they probably have people who are like, Coach, I want to come play for you. And he's like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
Well, I think
next year, they're bringing in one of the best recruiting classes in all of America. Like, they're going to be even better next year.
so. I think when it comes down to March, and really in college basketball, you see the teams that usually win it in March are senior laden or they're older, which that's why I feel like Duke has been impressive, but they are such a young team that might hinder them in March, in my opinion. One thing I want to ask you though is kind of taking a step away from Iowa State and just kind of the college basketball as a whole. As we enter into March Madness, who are a couple teams that maybe a mid-major or teams that people aren't really talking about, like Clemson? I feel like Clemson could make a run. Who are some teams maybe that you think could make a run that no one's talking about that we should maybe watch out for in March?
Marquette is a team that I think I called the Marquette Iowa State game earlier this year. I know Shaka really well. They check a lot of boxes. Offensively, defensively, Shaka's teams are always going to get after you defensively. I think coaching is still at a premium. You can make a list of what does it take to win a national championship. I still go back to those two H's that we talked about earlier. More than having a veteran team, more than having great guard play, more than having an elite head coach. I think the hottest and healthiest team is going to win, because I think that playing field has been leveled to the point where there's not that much it's not Auburn and everybody else or Duke and everybody else. It's Auburn, Duke, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Houston, Iowa State. I'll throw Texas Tech in there. That's 8 teams. That's just off the top of my head. There are still other teams that I could throw in there that you could be like, man, you start looking at their roster and their coaching and the DNA of that culture, and man, they can make some noise. And there's a number of teams like that. I'm not selling out UConn yet. I think UConn hasn't played their best ball, and I think given the fact that they have 2 years of experience under their belts, I would not want to face them in the NCAA tournament. So there are a bunch of teams. I think Michigan State is all of a sudden playing its best ball of the year. They have a Hall of Fame coach. They've got guards who can play. They've got big guys who can fly. So there's in this day and age, there's too many teams to say, well, these teams are expected and these teams could be sleepers. But if you're looking for a team, I would say Marquette would be a team. Cam Jones, if you don't know who he is one of the best all-around players in all of college basketball. And a guy like that, you're looking for who's going to have one shining moment in March. A guy like that can take a team on his shoulders and just go unconscious for, 2 or 3 or 4 games in a row and be in that zone and ride that wave. And all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, Marquette is in the Final Four and Cam Jones is averaging 25 a game, something like that. That would be a team off the top of my head that I would think of.
And Iowa State ran into Terrence Shannon last year. That was kind of he was kind of the March Madness darling. Yeah. Last question I've got for you, Rich, is will Nebraska win an NCAA tournament basketball game this year?
The Fighting Freddie Hoibergs. I would like to think that they could.
Obviously, it comes out a draw and all that.
It really does. I love watching Fred's teams play. The same reason I loved watching him when he was in Ames. But, I do think that one thing that I'm always torn on, fellas, is the argument of, well, the Big 12 has been so good that they beat each other up and then they're damaged goods when it comes to the NCAA tournament. And now that argument is starting to creep into the conversation about the SEC. Like, are they going to cannibalize themselves to the point where they run out of gas? Like, I know these coaches, and I know that they have short-term goals, like what is right in front of me. Like, Auburn is thinking, and I don't know who they're playing next on their schedule, but Auburn's like, Bruce Pearl is not thinking, okay, what do I have to do now as I'm preparing for March? He's thinking, how am I going to handle Vanderbilt tonight? Mm-hmm. They are myopic. But the good coaches with good teams always have an eye on the future. And just like football teams, they'll keep certain pet plays in their back pocket that they don't reveal unless they have to in a crunch time situation, sidelines out of bounds plays, last minute plays, things like that. So with the playing field being as wide open as it is, I wouldn't put it past Nebraska to steal a game. I mean, look, getting into the NCAA tournament is a victory for Nebraska. It's been a downtime for them. They haven't had the glory that they probably thought they would with Fred manning that program. And the Big Ten has not been great, despite Purdue making it as far as they've made. Before they did that, they were always the story, the cautionary tale. Oh, Purdue's a top seed. Oh, Purdue loses. Oh, Purdue's a top seed. Oh, Purdue gets upset again. Can Matt Painter ever win the big game? Well, then they go to a championship game, and that argument is over. But the Big Ten has been down for the last few years overall in terms of depth. So I wouldn't put it past Nebraska to pick somebody off. But like you said, I think a lot of it will come down to matchups if and when it comes down to that.
Yeah. I got one question. It's going to be, it's a little bit of a left turn. Big baseball fan, very excited for this season. Since they changed the pitch clock rules, the shift rules, like I didn't watch baseball for like 8 or 10 years because it was just too slow. There's not enough runs. There's not enough happening. I started kind of clicking back in, and this like baseball is fun again. So I have 2 baseball questions. One, because you're studio host for the Rays, correct?
Yes.
What is the Rays? Because when the hurricane went through and it just ripped the roof off, what is the plan for the Rays home games, and how is that going to impact their season? Because if they don't have, I imagine like home field in baseball isn't as big of a deal because, you get a hit second, but really it's not like a raucous environment. You're not getting this Game 7 type environment all the time. It's like a Tuesday at 11:30, but players are 30 minutes from their house and they get to go to the same coffee shop in the morning and you get the same routine. But when the stadium roof gets ripped off and you have to go somewhere else, how is that going to impact the game? So the first question is what is the plan for the Rays home games this year? And how do you think that's going to impact the players, the flow of the season, and how everything goes with that?
Well, they've spent the last few months trying to mitigate that as much as possible. The answer is they're playing at Steinbrenner Field, which is in Tampa, only about 30 minutes from where Tropicana Field is. It is a much smaller stadium. It's the spring training home of the Yankees, as strange as that sounds.
Steinbrenner, yeah.
Yes. And that's where they're going to play their home games. Major League Baseball has stepped in to try to adjust the scheduling because obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but for someone who's covered the team for 12 years and has lived in this area for almost 30 years, you can almost set your clock by there being thunderstorms for at least 15, 20 minutes at 5 o'clock every single day during the summer. So the idea of rainouts is a real issue. Even if there is a lightning strike 10 miles away, by law, they have to clear the stadium. So my job's going to be a lot harder. I'm going to be doing a lot of tap dance.
Get your small talk ready.
Yeah, but for the Rays, a lot of teams, and when you say, I understand what you're saying about home field advantage isn't really what it is, other than they sleep in their own beds and they're, going to their same coffee shops and stuff like that. A lot of teams construct their roster with their home field in mind, right? If we can dominate our home games, then on the road, all we have to do is go 500. That's the general consensus if you talk to a Major League Baseball manager. Like, go 20 games over 500 at home and go 500 on the road. Any manager would sign up for that. You're a 90-win team then, 90-plus win team then. But for the Rays, they didn't have the time to say, oh, wait a minute, we're playing in a smaller stadium and there's a short right field porch. We got to go sign a couple of left-handed bats. The Rays had already been looking for left-handed bats. They have left-handed bats. So I don't think it's going to strategy-wise help them. I do think that this could play in the Rays' favor offensively, The one caveat that I'm not sure about yet, and this could be the death blow to the Rays in a year where if all of this was wiped away and there were no hurricanes and they were playing in Tropicana Field, I would sit here and tell you, no bias at all, that I think the Rays would be the odds-on favorite to go to the World Series out of the American League. Because one reason, they very well could have the best pitching staff in the world without wearing a Dodgers uniform. Like the Dodgers are on another planet, but the Rays are bringing back healthy arms that they were missing last year and arms that grew up last year that are now back. They're 6 strong up and down, and they have 6 dudes who could be a number 1 or 2 starter on other teams. They are that good. So the smaller ballpark could actually hurt the Rays because they build their success around pitching and run prevention. They are a run prevention team, and they'll score a few runs to try to win games. That's how they've done it for the last 6 years up until last year when they didn't make the playoffs. They had a run of 5 straight years in the playoffs. It's because of run prevention. So overall, this is going to be a challenge for them because, the math dictates that there's probably going to be more runs scored in home games this year for the Rays than there ever has been at Tropicana Field. Tropicana Field is much more cavernous, and it's under a roof, so the ball carries. Here at Steinbrenner Field, when it's not raining, it's a smaller park, and you're probably going to see a lot more runs scored and a lot more home runs. Now, maybe it evens it out because the Rays are going to be doing that just like the opposition's doing that. But if the pitching can handle themselves in those confines, I think you could be talking in September about the Rays being one of the best stories in all of baseball, given the challenges that they've been faced with.
Yeah, and I just have to say, because I'm an Orioles fan, and between the Orioles, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Rays, and the Blue Jays, the AL East is just ridiculous this year. And it's going to be so much fun just to watch it. And the only thing is, like, without Juan Soto to deal with, are you like excited that you're covering a team that doesn't have to deal with Soto? Or are you disappointed you don't get to watch him 18 times or whatever it is that your team is playing him?
Well, I don't have numbers in front of me to back this up, but I will say one thing the Rays always do, except for a few players, you hear like whoever your favorite team is. If it's the Baltimore Orioles, you're like, oh, so-and-so, he is an Orioles killer. Like certain dudes just rake against other teams for their whole career, and you really can't put numbers behind that. But last year when Soto was a Yankee, the Rays handled him okay. They handle Aaron Judge really well. Aaron Judge's career numbers against the Rays are putrid. So the Rays figure out a way because, again, they are very much steeped in pitching and defense. They usually figure out a way to at least neutralize, if not completely take out of the game plan, the other team's best offensive players. Now, Shohei Ohtani, I think he hits 1 million against the Rays, but he hits 1 million against almost everybody. So we'll set that one aside as an example.
Well, we appreciate having you on. I think that's all the questions I have. When is the next time you're getting to Ames or calling an Iowa State game? Do you know?
I'm done for the year in Ames. I mean, obviously the regular season's winding down. It's crazy that there's 3 games left. I'll be in BYU this Saturday for West Virginia BYU. And then next Saturday, I'm in Tempe for the finale. That is Texas Tech and Arizona State.
Cool, man.
We've appreciated you coming on, though, Rich. Really glad to get you on.
I am honored that you asked me.
Yeah, thank you for your time. No, and we'll let you get back to your day. But thanks again.
All right, great talking to you guys.
You too. Thanks. That was Rich Hollenberg, and that was one of my more fun interviews I think that we've done in quite a while.
Yeah, of people that we don't intimately know. Like Coach Rhodes is really fun.
Yep.
A-Rob, Steele. But like we'd never met Rich before that. And he's just he is as pleasant before, after recording, interacting with as he was in the actual interview itself. Yeah, and he had shot me, a DM on Twitter after we'd recorded, and I tell you guys this, and he said, thanks for having me on, guys. Had a lot of fun. But I always love when, like, Fitz did this one time when he talked about the bombing or whatever, in Oklahoma, whatever it was. Rich dropped that, in the offseason last year, that TJ brought in Taman, Jiggy,
and Keyshawn, and basically, what he had said in the interview was, TJ basically told him, hey, our NIL is not, top dollar, but we can go out and get some guys that, can get us to where we need to go. Are you guys fine, taking a pay cut? I didn't know that. I always like it when guests come on and kind of give us a behind the curtain, look into things that they pick up, because obviously, Rich and Seth, they're talking to the coaching staff, they're talking to whoever they want to while they are there before the game. So it's always interesting to pick up on little tidbits like that might be, quote, off the record and then come on the record.
Yeah, and I think the thing that was fun about Rich is I like the behind the scenes, in the weeds stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of the off the beaten path things, because he's coming on Cyclone Fanatic. We know a lot about Iowa State, but he knows a ton about Iowa State. He knows more than we do about Iowa State, and he covers them like 4 times a year. And the things that I like is just, his approach towards broadcasting and his approach towards, looking at things a different way, where, we're talking about the Rays baseball, and I could have talked for another 30 minutes about baseball. But when he's talking about how, well, the weather in Florida is going to change the scheduling, and looking at it in a different way, that's like, it's just 2 steps down the road of what is right in front of you. Like, oh, great, the Rays got a stadium, they can play stuff. Yeah, but, and there's just this, and then how does that affect the team? How does that affect roster construction? All that kind of stuff that's just, you can tell that he's a smart guy that thinks very thoroughly about things, whether it's basketball, baseball, or otherwise.
Well, and I like too, we asked him about, I wanted to know, because obviously we're entering into March and the big dance, and I liked hearing what he said, because his perspective after talking to so many different coaches and what they had to say. And, his big thing was teams that are healthy and teams that are hot, or teams you want to watch for. And that rings true for a lot of teams. And you'll see it too with some mid-majors. I heard on 2 guys with Chris and Chris that Chris Hassel was just at VCU, and he said, these guys, if they get in the tournament, they probably need to win the A-10 if they're going to get in. But if they get in, they hustle, they play good defense, they can score the ball. Those guys are hot, and if they're healthy, they have a brand where they could be like a Cinderella. And that's what I wanted to pull out from these guys is, hey, you've covered a lot of teams. What are you seeing from these teams? And I guess what makes up, what kind of Cinderella, what kind of pedigree does the Cinderella need to have to be a Cinderella and make a run? And it's interesting to hear that stuff from their perspective. Yeah,
and we're going to get into the Seth Greenberg episode. So the last thing is Don't Be a Dingus. Books with Aer Lingus.
Neither one of our guests this week are dinguses.
They're not dinguses. Oh. They're incredibly very undingus-like. They're the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Cyclones to Ireland.com. But if you need to find a way to look forward to the football season, over this terrible basketball season that we're having to suffer through, in August, go to Ireland. Watch the Iowa State Cyclones beat the Kansas State Wildcats again.
Yeah, they will.
This time in Dublin. So you were mentioning the mid-major stuff, and before we get into the Seth Greenberg one, as far as scheduling, you'll notice that if you're watching the video version, that I'm wearing a different outfit. Grant wore the same sweatshirt.
No, the same day.
I don't think he owns another shirt, but we recorded with Rich yesterday, as we sit right now, and we were supposed to record with Seth today, but he had an air travel situation where something got booked and removed, and lost luggage, so wasn't able to meet with us today. So we're pushing this back to another time. Well, Grant's going to be out of town, so I'm going to be rolling solo on the Seth Greenberg interview. I'm excited. There's a lot. You talk about guys, I talk getting in the weeds and getting behind the scenes. I don't think there's many more people that love being in the weeds than Seth Greenberg, and I'm really excited to just kind of pick apart his brain on Iowa State basketball defense and what it makes Texas Tech, Houston, and Iowa State different from teams like Kansas, and what does Kansas up and down look like? How do mid-majors not getting scheduled against the major teams, how does that affect Cinderellas? What is the anatomy of Cinderella? And a guy like Seth Greenberg he will walk into the weeds and the deep water with me. So I'm excited.
Let's try to keep the episode under 2 hours though.
Boy, Aiden, I think you're going to have to, we don't have a rap sign, but you're going to have to make a rap sign, because if we
start playing,
if it's a Jeopardy thing, that's going to just get me to want to actually keep going. You need to play the Oscar music.
That's what I mean.
Slowly ramp it up to the point where it's deafeningly loud.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
I can still yell over some music if I need to.
Yeah, no, but I wish I could talk to him, but you guys are going to have a great interview. He's a lot of fun. I mean, he's fun to see on TV. And one thing I told you guys is that I tweeted at him when he was in town for game day, and he tweeted back at me like on a commercial break. I'm like, okay, this is not Seth Greenberg. This is an absolute joke. And then I was like, oh, maybe DM me. That might be easiest to for us to schedule. And then he followed me, gave me a DM with his email. Again, his email wasn't like at ESPN. It was a Gmail account that was, I'm like, I don't know if this is real. So then I shoot him an email, ask him what time that works. And then I'm looking at my phone. I'm watching ESPN and I'm looking at my phone. And as I get the alert, new email from Seth Greenberg, he's on my screen. And I'm like, ugh. This guy he's texting me on set at College Game Day. He is emailing me back on set on ESPN. I'm like,
never turns it off, man.
It never
just
turns
a
it off.
Productive machine.
He just the dude's a grinder. So I'm sad I'll miss it, but I know you guys are doing a good job.
All right. Well, that being said, let's get to it. Seth Greenberg. One of the people that I like to start off with a compliment just because it's easy to do. The thing that you do really well on air is you take a lot of really technical information and condense it down really, really fast. And I think that's a skill set that not a lot of people have, and you do really well. So thank you for coming on today. And I wanted to start with your assessment, because you were a coach for a really long time, and your job now is to kind of be able to translate what a coach sees into a fan's perspective. When you watch Iowa State, they're 19-1 when healthy, and they're 3-6 when they're not. How do you coach this team in a way that keeps them healthy, but keeps them being as aggressive as they are with the defense that they play? How do you ride that line as you get these 2 or 3 games left in the season into the Big 12s? How do you ride that line if you're TJ to keep them healthy, but still aggressive?
Yeah, you shorten your practice and you continue your high intensity. I mean, that's the most important thing. Obviously, there are recovery days after especially more intense games that you would have played. Jay Wright was really good at that in terms of getting recovery days. Recovery days would be weights, pool, skill work, no contact, walk through concepts defensively, reinforce the things that are the core beliefs and non-negotiables of what you're doing in terms of your next opponent, and then shortening your practice. I mean, you're shortening your practice. You guys are still going to come in and get extra shots. You're going to still do the skill work. They're still going to do their non-contact stuff. They can still do their film work. But you've got to, I'm not talking about load management like the NBA, because you're not shutting guys down, just, miss games. You can't afford to miss games. Your guys have missed enough games.
Yeah.
The hardest thing that TJ's had to deal with, and I thought that the Arizona game was incredible, even though Gilbert had 7 turnovers, is that you can't improve unless you practice. And you can't improve unless you have your team in practice. And when you lose one guy, like say Momcilovic, you lose him, everyone's role changes, your rotation changes, your substitution pattern changes. You lose Jones and Gilbert, all of a sudden now your substitution pattern and practice changes again. And then all of a sudden you get one back. So you get Jones back, but you don't have Gilbert back. But when you get Gilbert back, then it impacts Jones. He's coming off the bench, and impacts how you're approaching your practice and your preparation and your roles and how you might even defend things, or offensively what you might keep. Because let's face it, when Silvich is on the court, you got great spacing. Great spacing opens up the floor for Jones and Gilbert and Lipsy. Lipsy's job changes when you had Gilbert and Jones out, because now you're asking him to do more and taking away from maybe the things he does best. So TJ's managed it in an incredible way, because losing a piece is hard. Losing 3 pieces at 3 different times at 3 different positions is really hard.
Yeah, and this roster is so well built. And you brought up Keyshawn. Again, in the coach's perspective, Keyshawn's a guy that, in my mind, so I played football, and running back is the position I played, which when you play running back, you got to play, I'm the best dude on the field, get out of my way, I'm going to make you look stupid, that kind of aggressive confidence. And if you don't play with that, it's worse and it's less safe and it's not as good. And Keyshawn, to me, needs that attitude and that confidence to play. Even before the injury, it seems like he's thinking more than he's playing. How do you take a guy like that needs to have that kind of like swagger confidence and get that back to him with such little time before the tournament? Or is it just you got to trust that he's going to find his way out of it to deal with a guy like that?
There's a little bit of both. I think you have your video guy put together a video of him when he's at his very best. You sit down and one-on-one with TJ or one of the staff members and say, this is who you are. This is how you win. This is what you bring to our team. This is the essence that makes you different and special. And you make sure he understands that, and he sees it, and he processes it. And you reinforce, saying, we're better when you're aggressive. We're better when you're making plays. We're better when you're playing on instinct, and empower him. But then in the end, he's got to go out and do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can empower all you want, but that switch has got to go on. And when you miss a couple of weeks, and you're coming back and you have self-doubt, that's just human nature. But keep on reinforcing it, putting him in situations in practice when he's back to get those reps that, hey, I want you to make that play. I want you to go on that. Hey, that thing gets reversed, and you're attacking that closeout. All right, or when you have that shot, you got to let it go. Everyone's position to rebound the basketball. You got to let that thing go, and which TJ is so good at. I mean, he's a hard-nosed, tough coach that gets guys to play for him, and because he spends time with them and he has relationships with them, and you can see that. Everyone coaches in their own personality. I know Jay Bills talked about TJ doesn't get technicals, then the next game he got technical, but everyone's got to coach in their own personality and be comfortable. And then your players, what you can't be is you can't be a chameleon with your players. They got to know what they're getting each and every day. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And I think, just from my perspective, I always like, when I call it square peg, square hole. If you are a guy that's laid back, be laid back. Don't try and force something that you think you need to do. One last question, kind of in your coach hat, looking at Iowa State before we kind of get a little bit bigger to the Big 12. We see what Iowa State is when they're at their best. It's the Arizona game. It's at Texas Tech. They're sharing the ball. They've got spacing. They're driving. They're able to create spacing for everybody else. But we're coming up on tournament time. You draw Iowa State on the other side of the bracket. Iowa State's a 2, you're a 15, or a 3 and a 14, or whatever it is. What are you doing to prepare for Iowa State, and then how are you attacking Iowa State? I got to look in the mirror to know where my weaknesses are. How would you attack Iowa State?
It all depends on who I have. First of all, you play Iowa State, you got to match their toughness. I mean, that's just the way it is. You got to match their physicality, you got to match their toughness. Where they've improved, and then you got to compete offensively. Now, they're not the keep it on the sideline team they were 2 years ago. They're more kind of square up on the ball, but they're still physical and aggressive, and they create turnovers. So you got to compete to get the shot you want. I think what makes this team different is, Jefferson and Jackson. Those guys are different. They're different. Jackson finishes around the basket, catches most stuff, and obviously Jefferson's skill set makes it difficult. When you have Momcilovic, and Jefferson on the court at the same time, you got two big guys that can really handle the ball and pass, which is hard. So, the biggest thing is competing offensively. You got to figure out what matchups you're going to attack, who you're going to attack. And then you got to figure out your spacing. You got to deal with the pressure. You got to set your defense and guard the basketball. That's a big thing. You got 3 guys on the perimeter at times that can just go break your ankles. So, how far do you want to extend out? You can extend one, depending on how good, if I had a really good team and really athletic team, I'd guard one way. If I didn't have as good a team, they're going to be a 2 or a 3. Someone's going to try to probably own the tempo of the game. Someone's probably going to play heels to the 3-point line. Someone's probably going to, make sure their help is early so they don't have to overhelp and get spun around in transition. In terms of the bigs, you're going to probably, which bigs you're going to double. You're going to say we're going to play Jackson one-on-one, but we might, once Jefferson puts it on the floor, we might trap him on the first bounce, because sometimes when he puts it on the floor, stays alive, you can probably go and rip them. So they're a hard team to prepare for, because you can't simulate their toughness and their physicality in your practice. You got to shorten the game a little bit against them. You can't turn it over. Like I always say, the art of the upset. Take away the other team's best player. Hard to do against Iowa State, because you really don't know who their best players are going to be on any given night. Mm-hmm. You can't turn it over, because you got to limit turnovers. You got to limit second chance points. That's really, really important. So you got to make sure you cut people out and keep them off the glass. You got to own the tempo and rhythm of the game, whether you want to speed them up or slow them down. If you're probably an 11 or whatever and you're playing against them, you probably want to really kind of shrink that game a little bit. And then you've got to have someone step up and make a play for your team. If you can shrink the game and the pressure comes and you're playing on the road, playing in a neutral court, and people are all of a sudden rooting for the underdog, that's how you probably have a shot at pulling off the upset. They're a hard team to play against because they're a blue-collar team. It's not like, they're just flying up and down. The one thing you can do, and my only thing, the Achilles heel of Iowa State, is the unforced turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
Like the careless turnovers. They make some turnovers that you go like, what's that dude thinking? Like, they got to cut those down because those unforced turnovers will get him beat in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and so you mentioned a little bit ago when you were talking about, okay, we go heels on the three-point line and we're going to trap here. How quick in a game when you're, at first round of the NCAA tournament, you're at the under 8 and you're down by 12. Like, how quickly do you say, hey, we made a mistake in preparation as far as pace, or do you double down on that? Or is it just a gut feel to say, like, hey, we're just missing good shots? Like, how quick do you have to pivot off of an idea on a tournament? Because March Madness to me is unlike anything else. It is the biggest thing, and you got about that much time to prepare for that other team. So, like, how quickly do you have to pivot in game to something that a team you haven't played in 8 years?
Depends on the shots they're getting. Are they making tough shots? Are we not giving up second shots? Are we not turning it over? What shots are they making? What shots are we getting? I was telling a story. We played Loyola and Marymount when they had Bo Kibble and Hank Athers and those great explosive fast break teams. And my game plan was we were going to corral the ball in transition, which basically means our trail defender was going to kind of try to put their point guard, I think it was Gaines, in a soft trap to slow down the push. It was like 8-0, and I called the timeout. I said, all right, enough of that bullshit. All right, we're going to get our ass back and set our defense. We got to take good shots so we can set our defense, because your defensive transition is connected to your offensive execution. Like everyone talks about these transition teams. Like it's hard to run on Houston. Why? Because you work so hard to keep them off the offensive glass. But like you're playing Alabama, if you take shitty shots against Alabama, you turn it over against Alabama, they're gone. So like you play transition teams, your offense better be good. Because if your offense isn't good, your defense isn't good because you can't set it. And the whole key to playing teams that can really push and play fast and are more talented than you is you better set your defense. You got a better chance of getting a stop if you can set your defense than if you're taking a bad shot and it's a long rebound and you don't have floor balance and now you're getting back and now all of a sudden you got to communicate who's got the ball, who's back. They're attacking the gap, they're kicking it one more time. You're in rotation and you're basically screwed.
Yeah, and so you mentioned defensive transitions and stuff and communication, and that kind of pinged in my mind. Not necessarily Iowa State, but Big 12. What are your thoughts on Kansas? Because they are this Jekyll and Hyde. They're going to beat you by 30.
They're more Hyde. I don't know which guy was the good guy, which guy was the bad guy, but I would like to answer that question. Bill Self can't answer that question. Like Bill Self, to me, is one of the greatest coaches in the history of our game. And he has having a hard time. They have no consistency. They have no continuity. I was just actually doing my notes for the game against Houston tonight that we're about to do a Sports Center hit on and stuff tonight. And like, they beat Duke. They beat North Carolina. They beat Michigan State. That's Kansas when they're at the very best this season. But like their best win in the Big 12, did they get you guys or you got them?
They won. They kicked the shit out of us at Fog.
Yeah. That's their only win against the field in the Big 12.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
That's their only win against the field in the Big 12. Now that's crazy. So like, they're hard to figure out. I mean, Hunter Dickinson, Dewan, and KJ all are having subpar seasons in relation to last year. They went to the portal, and those guys haven't fit. That's the way it is. I mean, like they haven't fit or they haven't bought in. Zeke Mayo's been the best, and he went through whatever he went through yesterday. I guess he had a rough game the other day, and people kind of took swings at him, which is ridiculous. That's just another story. Just people understand how hard these kids work and how much they invested in it. You played, you understand how hard these coaches play. The other team's trying to win also. The other team has players that are on scholarship. The other team is preparing to win a game. And like I understand in the NIL era, it's not NIL, it's pay for play. People can, and in the world that you can bet anywhere you want, which is crazy. people lose money and they get aggravated. People are fans and maybe have paid into collectives and they're pissed off when a guy doesn't play well because I paid it. I helped bring that guy there. But the venom and the hate and the mean-spirited attacks on all these people, that what, it's hard. It's hard to win. It's hard to win a game. It's hard to win a bunch of games. And Kansas is finding out the pieces just don't fit. And figuring that out. One week it's Shaquille Moore who plays really, really well, and next week he's out. Then it's David Coy, and then it's AJ Testor gets a shot. Bill's brilliant. They haven't been able to figure out the consistency you need in a very, very good league. And when you're not consistent playing in a good league, you're not going to win games.
Yeah. The last question, because you said you had to go get to SportsCenter. Feels like it's more important than our show. The thing that is interesting about college basketball right now is that it feels like the parity, and even more so with football, the parity is higher because I don't have to wait 3 years to maybe get to the NBA to make enough money for my family to send it back or whatever to maximize your earning potential. So it kind of spreads everything out. But one thing that has switched a little bit is, so I grew up in Des Moines. Drake Bulldogs, it's Des Moines' team. But now Iowa State and Iowa don't play Drake, and you went to Farley Dickinson, and like the high majors and the mid majors not playing each other as much. I don't know. Do you feel like this is a thing that will pendulum back at all? Because without so it's just going to be high majors.
Well, the only reason being is because of these super conferences, we're playing 18 game schedules now. You're going to end up playing this kind of reorganization of college athletics is going to continue. I mean, we're going to have 4 super conferences eventually. I don't know when, but you're going to be playing 20 and 22 game schedules. So then if you play 20, say you play 20 game schedule, let's keep it at that. And you're playing an MTE, that's 23. You play in a challenge like the SEC, ACC or whatever, the Big 12 has their, all right. So that's 24. You're going to play one made for TV game. That's 25. All right. You might have one other NIL game to make money for your players. That's 26. You're going to play 4 home games, man, because you got to pay the bills. And so it's hard. I mean, it's hard to. Oh yeah, well, we got little old Drake over here, and we're gonna play them home and home because we want to help them make some money. You know what? Like, that sounds good. I mean, but it's not realistic. And I'm like, all right, so are you going to play Northern Iowa too? All right, or if you're Virginia Tech, are you going to play JMU, VCU, Old Dominion, William and Mary, George Mason, and you go right. I mean, everyone has to do what's in their best interest. Scheduling is really hard. And everyone does what's in their best interest. You don't walk around and go, hey, the goodness of my heart, I'm going to play all. No, because then if you play that schedule, your fans that are buying season tickets are going, hey, we want to see you play X, Y, and Z. So, scheduling's hard. Look, what Coach McCollum's done is incredible. It's kind of fun to show you. I've always thought that mid-major guards or Division II guards, if you have the very best of them, they can play anywhere as long as they have the size. And that's what's happened. He's an incredible coach. It seems like a great guy. I mean, and obviously Coach Cerise was a great coach prior to him. So, I mean, Drake's done a really good job, and it's a very tough place. And these last 2 generations of coaches there have been great. But scheduling's hard. With the super conferences and the money that's involved, you got to raise money. There's donor fatigue, so you got to find different revenue streams to be. Even with the collective bargaining stuff, with revenue sharing, you're still going to have to find other revenue streams because, think about this. 2 years ago, NIL, which is pay for play. Let's be honest. Let's not bullshit each other. A good budget was probably $2 million a year ago. A good budget now in NIL is $5, $6, $7, $8 million. There's a guy at BYU that's going to be getting $7 million himself. So it is what it is. So it's hard. It's hard. Yet we'll still have the NCAA tournament. Someone will get upset. Everyone will lose their mind. And that's great. And the NCAA tournament's not going to go away. Those teams will always be in the tournament. I really believe that. Now, it might be the first four. The thing in Dayton might be 4 regions, and there might be 16, and those 16 might be the 16 lowest rated conferences. So you'll only get 8 of them in the field, but you'll get the best 8. Mm. So, everyone's losing their mind about expansion. It went from 32 to 56 or whatever to, if it goes to 76 and we do 4 first fours, it's not a big thing. But I'll tell you what, if you have 20 team conferences, those 20 team conferences, they're not getting 6 teams in the NCAA tournament because those other 14 teams that aren't in, that if they were in their old conference would have been in because they would have been one of the top 4 or 5, right? That's not flying in this economy of college athletics anymore. Just not.
Yeah, man, we got deeper than I expected. And I really appreciate the background workings of scheduling and budgeting. So you got to get to SportsCenter. Thank you a ton for your time.
My pleasure.
I would love to pick your brain more on basketball.
And we're going to have TJ on our half times today. We're taping something with him at 5:30. So
cool.
We're excited to have him. He's a great dude.
We'll tune in for it. Thank you, Seth.
Great. Thank you.
I'm back. You guys thought I left. No, I just came back on to thank our loyal listeners who are still listening after this long but fantastic episode. And as always, remember, adopt. Don't shop.